Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for this invitation, Eric and NJ All. And I, I'm looking at the people in the little screens, like what was that show that they always had the Hollywood Squares? This looks like Hollywood Squares, New Jersey style. With all those faces there, most of whom I don't recognize. I spent 25 years of my life in New Jersey, living in various communities and working for some of that time in New Jersey in various roles and volunteering, like many of you with NJ All, which was actually one of the best experiences of my professional career. And I recognize Judy Faraday, Barry Semple, Dave Kring, Nancy Fisher, Connie Schwein, and Jessica, as well as Eric, among the people that I knew from those days. And there might be a few of you that I've left out, and I apologize. But those are people that I worked with more in depth. So I'm really happy to be here. And as I say here, I'm happy to reconnect with New Jersey. And also to learn from you. I'm going to try to hang around for the next couple of days, and it looks like your agenda, it looks very interesting for the conference. So Eric asked me to try to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we can turn it over maybe for some comments and questions. So let me just get started and make good use of my 20 minutes here. What I'd like to do today is to share with you a proposal for what I'm calling a new community-oriented approach to adult foundational education. And I'm going to explain what those various terms mean in a minute. I'll give you an overview of the strengths and origins and limitations of our current adult education efforts in the country, as well as a vision for what we're calling a community-oriented adult foundational education system that better serves more learners, and also in the process serves more families and communities and other stakeholders. And I'll break that vision down into some guiding principles, talk about what this might look like in practical terms at the local level, give you a few examples. Talk about how this system might be supported and who could provide some of those supports. And if time permits, and I'm not sure I'll have enough time for all of this, talk a little bit about what advocates can do, because you need that whole package. You need the principles, the practices, the supports, and you got to advocate for it. And if you leave any of those out, none of it really ends up happening. That's some of my experience. And I think, some of the people on the call can attest to that, because we talked a lot about these kind of issues in my years in NJ All board meetings. And we tried to act on it in the great conferences and other advocacy work we did. And if time permits, we have a little time, I'd like to hear from you how, whether and how what I'm saying here makes any sense to you in New Jersey. Are you trying to do any of these things? Have you tried doing them? Do you have ideas for how you might move forward with this? So that said, as our agenda, let me start. I'll touch briefly on this term. I can't see everybody now on the screen, but I won't do a poll exactly. But this term adult foundational education may or may not be familiar to you. I did talk with Jessica a little bit about this about a month ago, and she gave me her feedback on this term. But without going into a lot of talk about this, just to say this is a term that's emerging around the country that tries to encompass all the different types of services that adult education provide. We're more than just literacy in the very basic literacy sense. We're ESOL, GED, we provide digital literacy type skills, workforce and health and citizenship education. We provide lots of other support. So depending on your program, how big it is and how many staff you have and what the mission is, helping people get educational and career credentials, for example, and providing various kinds of counseling and connections to support networks and access to various kinds of digital and other kinds of tools that people need for their work and family and civic and other roles that they play in life. So I'll be talking about adult foundational education, or AFE, in this, hopefully in a not a very dogmatic way. I don't care what you really call it. It's just a term that I'm going to be using. So to start with this first point about the origins and strengths and limitations of our current field. I mean, it's a lot to cover in one slide and then just a few minutes, but quickly to say that adult education, or AFE, has had for several decades now a particular focus on workforce preparation, not exclusively, and not all of you get the public funding that requires you to do that. But as a whole, this is, if you listen to various conferences and reports and the National Coalition for Literacy, the language is often around workforce development as an outcome of adult ed. A lot of this really developed, starting in the mid 80s through the mid 90s, when there was a major focus in the country on what was called workplace literacy initiatives. The U.S. Department of Education and Labor and various employer groups and labor unions and others got on board with the idea of developing various initiatives to support the basic skills development of incumbent workers, people already employed in the workplace. And there were really great models developed. I really was very involved in that kind of work, and I'm very proud of what my colleagues and I did and all we learned, et cetera. And I think a lot of that stuff is still quite valuable and relevant today. But out of that came then, by the mid 90s, the Department of Education, is a major source of funding for our field. They, through various pieces of legislation, shifted a lot of the focus to work readiness or employment or job readiness, various kinds of ways of saying it, but helping not so much incumbent workers. I mean, the interest in workplace programs almost evaporated overnight. And I was out of a lot of consulting work. It was like, wow, I got really good at evaluating these programs, or so I thought. And all those the funding for those all dried up. But instead, the field was really pushing the idea of career pathways and other kinds of programs, helping people in a systematic way get the education and other supports they need to move into rewarding jobs. And I think in principle, that's great. If it can be done. It's not always easy, and there are a lot of obstacles to that, including factors way beyond the control of our field. We don't control who hires people, what the economy is, what the job market is, what employers pay to workers. So there's a lot of things in the mix in these programs, but that was the shift, sort of the shift that happened then, and it's continued till now. And to be kind of objective about it, looking at the strengths and the limitations of these efforts, there's some great stuff that came out of this. And probably many of the people on this call have been involved in this. Their funding was used to help actual learners develop skills and connections to employment, and otherwise to help them and their families, maybe improve their job security and economic security. Various industries were served, provided with well-qualified employees, et cetera. As well as curricula and assessment models and models of partnerships. How do you develop a partnership? A lot of that was developed in these work-related programs. And it's not an easy thing just to go out to employers and say, hey, I want to work with you. You got to sort of know how to do that. And funding streams and mechanisms were put in place for these programs. So these were, potentially, positive outcomes of these efforts. But going back almost to the beginning, I've done literature reviews about this and read articles that were written back at the time when these things were really getting started back in the mid 90s. Questioning some of the assumptions and practices and so forth that were happening in these work-related programs. One concern that's been raised consistently is that an over-focus on employment as an outcome makes programs less relevant to many learners. I mean, because many of our adult learners don't have getting a job as their major goal or any goal at all. I mean, they already have a job, or they are nearing retirement, or they're at home, or they're disabled. I mean, there are reasons why people don't have that as their number one goal, or even it might be lower on their list of priorities. Caring for their children, caring for the family health. We know learners come with a lot of other kinds of issues other than just getting a job. So, so the question is, this overfocus makes programs less appealing and relevant to learners. So that's one set of concerns. Another is that the outcomes that were expected, people making skill gain as measured on an assessment test, or improving their employment prospects, or getting a job, they weren't realistic within the timeframes that were presented to programs. And especially smaller programs also found the reporting requirements that were required by these by these funders were just not manageable. And that really turned a lot of programs off, and actually led to the closing of many programs. Many of the great community-based and volunteer programs and other programs from years past, in the 80s and 90s, they no longer exist, in part because they just kind of got scared off by this funding requirements. The research infrastructure that was supporting this kind of work has, in many ways disappeared in our field over the past couple of decades. The National Institute for Literacy and the National Center for the Study of Adult Learning and Literacy, especially NIFL, they had major focus on workforce preparation, developing curricula and models of integrating basic skills with work readiness. All that's disappeared. All the products that they produced, in the case of NIFL, they're no longer easily accessible anywhere, even digitally online. So, and then the bottom line, I mean, literally on this PowerPoint here, is that of the numbers of people served. I mean, many of you may have heard these statistics, but there's estimates of anywhere from 3 to 10% of the potential beneficiaries, people that could benefit from adult ed. Maybe 3 to 10% of those millions of people actually enroll in a program, let alone persist and achieve some meaningful outcomes. So something's going on there. Is it lack of relevance? Is it lack of accessibility? I mean, there's probably many reasons that people don't come. But so we are challenged, and these are concerns, and so it's led to a number of people to be calling for rethinking the content and purposes, et cetera, of adult foundation-led programs. I and others have been writing articles. I know Eric is one of them, calling these raising these kinds of concerns and calling for rethinking of the content and purposes and so forth and funding of adult ed programs. And I'm in the process of writing a paper that try to get into more depth on this. I'm using the term a community-oriented adult foundational education system, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. But in a nutshell, the principles that are commonly raised in these arguments are that we need to focus on responding to a broader range of learner needs and serving more learners. I mean, making them more relevant to more needs and to more people, and actually making ourselves accessible and welcoming and supportive of more people. Whether it's face-to-face learning or online or whatever, that remains to be seen. But we need a system that does that. And there are several strategies that are listed here. By no means these are all of them, but integration of adult foundational education with other supports. That's certainly been done with the work readiness part of it. But there are other kinds of supports learners can benefit from in terms of health literacy and financial literacy and other kinds of issues that they're dealing with in life. So the idea is you have these integrated partnerships that help learners manage both opportunities and challenges that are relevant to them in their work and family and civic and lifelong learning roles. Another focus and strategy is empowerment of learners, thinking of our programs as is implicit in the title of the National Institute for Literacy's Equip for the Future initiative, which was something that was piloted in New Jersey. I'm not sure how much the remnants of that are still felt in New Jersey, but their EFF, Equip for the Future, talks about equipping learners for the future. And that title alone attracted me to that initiative. And I was very involved in using that and getting trained in it, et cetera. And I still use that much of what they did in that project, and they developed in that project in my own work for years since. But the idea is to empower learners to be equipped to manage challenges and opportunities they face, be active participants and problem solvers and leaders in the various kinds of communities that they operate in. And by communities, we're not saying, this is a phrase I borrowed from Hannah Fingeret. Some of you are familiar with her work. She was a sort of a major voice in our field 30 years ago. She used the term community oriented. And she defined community as not just the physical geographic neighborhood that people live in, but the various social contexts that people operate in. So I'm adopting that term here to say that we're helping learners to be empowered to manage their participation effectively in various contexts of work, et cetera. But we also want to empower us as adult ed providers. We have, I don't have to do the sob story thing. We have historically been sort of this poor stepchild or of the education field with limited resources, little recognition, et cetera. I mean, we've done a great job considering the limitations we face, but we need more resources, and we need more to be more empowered with supports and recognition and so forth. So empowerment also applies to us as adult educators, and also empowering other stakeholders with resources and guidelines and opportunities to work with us in collaboration to help learners succeed and build those communities that we are surrounded by. Another principle is allowing effective models to continue. I'm not advocating for, and I don't think anybody I've been reading about says we have to throw out all the existing programs because they're no good. That's not true. I mean, there are a lot of great programs out there, probably represented on this call today. I don't know all of you, but I certainly interacted with and worked with a number of fantastic programs in New Jersey that inspired me and have kept, and informed my work. And I'm going to talk about a few of them in a few minutes. But, the idea is to allow those programs to continue if they're effective, to be fair, but also creating new ones that serve more learners and respond to more needs. So, and then finally recognizing adult ed, high quality adult ed, adult foundational ed. And I put that word high quality. I'm not a cheerleader for just saying, oh, all adult ed can do everything perfectly. I mean, that's nutty. It's childish and it's naive. I mean, we have to promote high quality adult foundational ed and try to reach that kind of standard as much as we can. But recognize this as a real profession. And that can really contribute to the improvement of our communities and help our communities solve the many social and other problems that we face as a nation. I mean, face it, there's a lot of stuff going on in our country, and adult ed can play a positive role in helping to deal with some of those issues. So all that said, that's very lofty. Those are nice principles, right? But what might this look like at a practical local level? And I'm all in favor of getting into the nitty gritty because I read too many articles that stop at that previous slide. They all cite the problems, and then they say, well, we should have this great thing that has all these, reaches all these great standards, but they never get down to the nitty gritty of how do you make it happen. And I think you folks, I don't know all of you here, but I think if you are the kind of doers at the community level that are trying to make good things happen. But in this community-oriented model, we're advocating for stressing the idea of teams. So let's say at a county level, in your county in New Jersey, there would be collaborative teams that would be composed of a number of stakeholders. One is the adult ed providers. And in your county, you might only have 1 or 2 adult ed programs. In another, you might have 5 or 6 or 7 or more providers. But the idea is, as much as you can, to collaborate with those other partners. And I think often your funders, your workforce investment boards, I'm not sure exactly what you have in New Jersey today, but where I used to be in one of the counties, we had a workforce investment board with an adult ed committee, and that was our consortium, adult ed consortium or collaborative or coalition. So to collaborate with them for all sorts of good reasons, and I think you understand what those could be: referrals and co-training and co-funding, going after funding together and so forth. There's a lot of reasons to have a good network, but that kind of network in turn would work with other stakeholders, including potentially adult learners. In some cases, adult learners can play a role in these kind of collaborations. Adult learner leaders, so to speak, can step in and play roles and be parts of these collaboratives. But working with other stakeholders, again, the workforce partners and others, to again build on lessons learned in the past and current programs. There's a lot of great tools, curriculum, program models, etc. out there. It drives me nuts to how little we pay attention to good stuff that's already been developed in our field. And that's probably a sign of my increasing age, looking back fondly on all the wonderful things in the past. Everything in the past wasn't rosy, but there are great models of things that could be developed. We don't do a great job of preserving those and disseminating them and making it easy for people to track down. And more power to New Jersey All for at least providing this kind of opportunity for sharing of good ideas and so forth. But building on past experience as well as more recent stuff, there's still great stuff being evolving in the field. With that collaborative ethos and network, do a community level needs assessment to identify the needs, the AFE related needs. Who are the populations in that community that could benefit from this? What are their particular needs? Is it English? English for what purpose? Do they need math? Do they, are there job opportunities here that they need help with? And what are the assets or resources in the community? The providers of adult ed, as well as other resources in the community. I mean, I think you understand that, but I'm seeing a lot of, there's a lot to be said for this kind of collective, collaborative needs assessment and planning. I'm all for it. And then in turn, okay, you get a plan, but you have to have the capacity to carry it out. And it's not just funding, but expertise and so forth and guidelines. So there should be a focus on capacity building to really help providers work with their partners to conduct, I think working around projects is a great strategy for keeping yourself focused and really responding to particular populations and so forth. So what I'm saying here is to help partners to be able to conduct projects that respond to various needs and opportunities, to pilot them, to learn from those projects and possibly expand these high quality integrated service projects that are again customized to particular learners and stakeholders and contexts. So what do I mean by these projects, And I think if you might be thinking, oh yeah, we did this one with such and such, and we do this in our program on this, great. Well, keep those in mind. I'm going to share with you a couple of examples. And I know I'm past my 20 minutes, Eric. Are you going to put a hook around my neck, or do I need to stop here? And I respect you if you do, but
no, you don't need to stop here. But I think start thinking 10 minutes or so to,
Yes, okay, well, it won't be more than 10 minutes, I can
Okay.
assure you. And if any of you need to turn off your screen and take a nap, I will understand. But seriously, I mean, so I'm not going to go through all these, but we can come back to them if anybody wants to come back. But just a couple to give you an idea what I'm talking about. A work readiness and an adult basic skills program for recently released inmates, for example. That's one example. The funder in this case was a national foundation which supported into models of integrated prisoner reentry initiatives around the country and within the state. And they focus in particular on getting community colleges to play a role working with reentry kinds of services. The partners in this case was an adult ed provider, the County Human Services Office, the State Parole Office, and a day reporting center. And it might be a term you're familiar with or not, but if not, a day reporting center is basically a center where returning inmates have to report regularly for drug screening or counseling or other kinds of services. So in this case, the adult ed provider went in and created a classroom there. They got computers, refurbished computers, worked fine, donated by the local community college. They had adult ed staff go in there and do really great participatory kinds of career exploration activities, help them learn how to use computers in the computer lab, but around projects, developing a resume or developing a PowerPoint in which they talked about their lives, et cetera. So it was actually pretty fun. A lot of the inmates had hardly ever touched a computer, and it was, as you can understand, it can be quite miraculous to watch like a guy who's like some really tough looking guy who's always got a frown on his face and suddenly brighten up when he's seeing me. And, he found this funny graphic to put into his PowerPoint. So there was a lot of team building and sort of social emotional strength building, we think, in that project. Another example, similar example, was an ESOL for elder care careers. This one was developed by a community college with the support of another national foundation, which in this case was trying to support pilots models of how to support and develop the elder care workforce. Recognizing that our population is growing, there's a huge demand for home health aides and nursing home workers who can work with older people. And so in this case, the AFE provider partnered with some home care and nursing home employers in their county, picked the brains, sort of did a needs assessment, sort of like a literacy task analysis modified version. Like, what is it that you're finding to be a gap in terms of the English skills, for example, of the people coming in for jobs in your agency? And they gave us, lots of great examples. We also hired as one of our staff a person who worked in the elder care field, along with an ESL teacher who was fantastic, very creative. And they partnered and came up with this great little curriculum for ESL. They got them in a computer lab. They helped them develop nice resumes using a template. These are all Spanish-speaking immigrant women, some of whom had already worked in the elder care field and were working in it, but they wanted to upgrade their skills and their connections to employers, et cetera. Maybe get a certificate or maybe move on to more, just develop their English more generally and otherwise pursue an education. And so it was a great program. They did again, a lot of team building, a lot of sharing among the participants. It was a really nice community activity. The women, there was a dress for success component where all the women got like a black pantsuit with a white blouse and showed up looking very professional at the graduation ceremony and made speeches and shared wonderful food from their home country, et cetera. And they got introduced to employers who were just eager. I mean, I wouldn't say they're knocking down the doors exactly, but they were very eager to meet these students. So I could go on, we don't have time right now, but so those are some examples. The idea of being, rather than just create one big, monolithic adult ed program that everybody who comes into the door has to go through the same curriculum. No, we're saying we need the capacity to be customizing and providing these kind of customized services. And there are many examples, and I'm sure you could give some as well. I'll just say quickly, this is fine and dandy, these models. Without support, they're not going to go anywhere. I mean, all those projects I described had some real great support, at least initially, to do the initial versions. In many cases, they didn't continue just because the other funders didn't come in behind them and say, hey, this was worth pursuing. We could do more of these in this county. So you really need champions who can make that kind of happen. But the supporters involved include both the usual suspects or traditional AFE supporters, in New Jersey, for example, who they are. But other stakeholders I already mentioned, workforce partners, health agencies that could come in and do various kinds of health-related activities with your students, public safety agencies and the reentry and correctional facilities. I think probably some of you are working with them already. That maybe there's a good chance people in your student body, since it's true of our general population as a whole. I mean, lots of people have criminal records and maybe have been in prison or face challenges in terms of employment and so forth because of a criminal record. Maybe they don't always share it with you, but it's common, So this idea of prisoner reentry, it permeates our field as a need. Supporters of digital access and digital equity are clearly, well, I hope that it's clear. I mean, these are real potential partners, and there is national, federal Digital Equity Act funding that you might consider accessing if you're not aware of it or already pursuing it in New Jersey. It's a potential big source of funding and maybe would allow you to do some very creative things with computers with your students. K-12 schools are potential partners, and for family or two generation programs, and other kinds of community groups and agencies that serve various populations, including people with disabilities. I think you know who your potential partners are. But to say that these are the partners, they can provide funding, they can help support professional development and contribute to it in various ways. They can provide publicity to build awareness of other stakeholders. They can provide you with ideally user-friendly reporting and funding procedures. In my experience, it's much easier to work with a foundation than it is with a public funder for all sorts of reasons. I think the public funding guidelines are sometimes way too, and reporting requirements are overly complicated. But and just generally supporting the idea of continuously learning from good practices and research and evidence and evaluations that have preceded us. So we're not always reinventing the wheel. We're very inefficient in that regard. If we have to continue, we always have to reinvent everything from scratch. I know I'm over time. Oh yeah, 10 minutes over time. I will stop here. I'm not going to go through this slide, but I think it's a, it's a list of things that advocates could do. But I'm going to just turn it back to Eric and to the group. And if there is time, I'm happy to try to respond to comments or questions. If not today, I'll leave my email. You can get in touch if you're interested in talking further. But thank you. Thank you for listening and giving me this opportunity.
All right, thanks, Paul. Certainly there's others. I think we have time for a few questions, but again, Paul's going to have a whole session tomorrow where he's going to explore these and some other ideas in more detail. In the program, in the information section about this opening plenary, there's a link to Paul's website. And if you go to Paul's website, you can download a number of pieces that he's written on this topic. So that's another way to get more information from Paul about that. So before we turn it over to the award ceremony, any pressing questions or thoughts for Paul? You can put those in the chat and I can pass them along. or we can unmute you. While people are thinking, Paul, the one thing that really came to mind at the end of your talk is not only are these partnerships sort of necessary to support adult ed, but if this is going to happen, people who are invested in adult ed need to be able to advocate for these other areas as well, right? So it's not just a one-way street, right? So, for example, I think it's really important that people in adult education support expanding childcare, right? Because if we don't have expanded childcare, it's going to be very difficult for people to get to classes. And that childcare issue is a longstanding one in certain communities, right? And so adult educators need to be able to step up to the plate and advocate for that. And then it'll be a bi-directional effort, right? So we can't just always be asking for people to support adult education. We need to actively support those other people working to support the community.